Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, CoachEUrban. I'm a certified executive coach, and what I do is I help driven, experienced, emerging, and evolving leaders remove career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. Today, we'll be talking about that income when it comes to the future of work. What can we expect as we move forward into the future of our workplaces and job seeking as well? And it's a lot more to do than just wearing pants in the office. I say that jokingly, but actually, that's actually a real consideration for some people. Don't necessarily want to put on the inner office or go to the office workplace trogs. They want to be more comfortable. But it's much more than just that. So today we'll be talking about what it means to thrive in the future of work. So when you're tuning in, please say hi, say where you're from, say your name. Sometimes I can't always see your name depending on what social platform you are tuning in from. So I'd love to welcome you to the show. And most importantly, today is a live Q&A. Well, if you've been a part of the Career Coffee Chat show before, you know that I'm here to answer your questions, whether or not you're showing up live or whether you're watching the replay later. And speaking of replays, please do check out my Career Coffee Chat podcast on all the available channels, including YouTube. And if you do like Career Coffee Chat, please feel free to subscribe on my YouTube channel, which you can find in the links below in the description of this live event. And you can also find tons of great resources. I'm getting ready to kick off a summer of fun and involvement when it comes to elevating your career. So stay tuned to what that may look like as in the months to come. I'm pretty excited about that. Maybe some workshops, some more information, some great tools and resources for you to thrive in the future of work. So great to see you, Rosanna, tuning in from Cypress, Texas. So again, when you're hopping in on the show, whether you're live or watching a replay later, please say where you're from, say your name. I'd love to see you and welcome you to the show. And like I mentioned before, this is a live Q&A. So I'm here to answer any questions you have about how to thrive either now or in the future of work. Because as you probably already know, as we're moving forward and transitioning out of the pandemic world into perhaps either blended model, hybrid models, remote work in the office, etc., and everything in between, it will be very different than what we've been used to. And we need to know how to still elevate our careers, whether or not we're in any one of those combinations. Hi, Glenn, great to see you from Washington, D.C., tuning in on LinkedIn. And if you're feeling shy and you don't want to ask your questions live or on the replay, feel free to personal message me. I'm here to help and support you at the highest level. So we'll be talking about today, future work. What are those key insights that will help you stand out? Now, if you're feeling a little anxious about returning to work, just know, or in-person workplace environments, just know that you're not alone. Okay. I'm feeling a little anxious myself as someone who is a speaker. I do not necessarily miss the quote unquote speaker life, hopping on an airplane and not knowing what city you're in from one week to the next. So I'm looking forward to hopefully more of a hybrid and blended model there as well, because I can still deliver great content to audiences all over the world and not necessarily have to be there in person. However, from time to time, there is a deep value for being in the office in person. I know that in many instances, I can't wait for in-person meetings to start again, just depending on what the situation is. And you may find yourself feeling very much the same way. So great to see you, Eva, tuning in from Chicago. Woohoo, Chicago in the house. All right, so what is coming for the future of work? That's what we'll be talking about today. What is coming for the future of work? What can you expect? And most importantly, what can you request as an employee and or job seeker? The pros and cons of what's to come. And again, as I mentioned before, how to elevate yourself in a very strong change cycle. For any of you who have heard the term new normal and feel like you want to hit somebody the next time they say that, you're not alone. There's no such thing as normal yet. We're in a very strong change cycle, both in our workplaces and socially and economically. Across the spectrum, we're seeing so much change. So just keep that in mind when we go back to more in-person events, in-person meetings, and into a workplace that expects us to show up in person. there will be a lot of differences, different views, different mindsets, different ways of being than there were prior to the pandemic. So give people space and grace. And give yourself some space and grace too, because like it, loathe it, change is coming again. So we need to be prepared and know what to expect so you can thrive and rise above anything that's thrown your way. And most importantly, manage it and what you can request of your employers and how to make sure that you're able to elevate your career moving forward. Now, returning to work may not be as straightforward as you might think. So I'd love to hear what some of your top concerns are. Go ahead and pop those in the chat. What are your top concerns about going back into a remote workplace environment? Or if you're seeking new opportunities, what were your big questions about what you should look for when it comes to being a job seeker and wanting to make sure that you're getting it back into a situation where it aligns with your priorities? Because a lot of us have taken some time, do what I call the pandemic pause, to have the time to reflect. Whether we were actively working at the time or job seeking, we have had some time to reflect about what's important to us. And moving forward, that may be very different than what it was in the past, right? So I'm seeing people's priorities shift quite a bit, focusing more on overall family, personal time, a lot of words called freedom. A lot of people are using the word freedom. They want more freedom, more control over their own schedules, more flexibility. So let me know if that's you, because I'm finding that most people I've talked to, that is certainly the case. Hi, Cornisha. Great to see you tuning in from Spring, Texas. So let me know what your top concerns are. And if you or one of your new top priorities really is around freedom and flexibility, and if that resonates with you. So some of the things we can look forward to or be aware of when it comes to returning to work, if you will, or re-entering, is physical factors, social factors, mindset considerations, company culture, individual priority shifts, and new expectations of what normal might be. And I use this term loosely because, like I mentioned before, there isn't a normal yet. We're in a very strong change cycle. So we're kind of making it up as we go. So just don't expect solid answers or necessarily a lot of confidence in what's coming forth from your leaders, and particularly those people making these plans, because they have no idea yet. This is uncharted territory. We've not ever had in our current social structure a time where we've had to take basically a year of remote work and then figure out how to re-enter. That's not happened before. So this is very new for us. So give people, like I mentioned before, some space and grace, how to be able to figure this out and help them figure it out, because they don't necessarily have all the answers. Hi, Jesse. Great to see you from Fulshire, Texas. And again, as I mentioned before, this is a live Q&A. So as you probably already know, if you've been a part of the Coffee Chat before, Career Coffee Chat Live is here to help you and support you. So you can pop your questions and comments in as you see fit. And if you're feeling shy, send me a personal message later. I'm happy to answer your questions. So what friction can you expect when it comes to remote work, and most importantly, returning to maybe a hybrid or full-time in-person office space? Well, newsflash, not everyone is excited to go back to the office. In fact, different people have different levels of comfort when it comes to the obvious, the virus, right? People have different levels of comfort around that. Some people are like, I'm vaccinated, woohoo, I'm gonna go see, hug everybody. Other people are like, that's not my jam. And I would encourage you to be open-minded, allow people to have their own personal freedoms of what their choices are, and not get too caught up about that. Because as you probably remember, before we left the office, the workplace, and went more remote before, there was a lot of political tension. Everybody's gunning for everybody. And how awful did that make the workplace? So keep in mind, we have just as much tension and personal choices of the differences of mindsets, and how people want to show up in their lives are very different than perhaps yourself. So give people space and grace and try to keep that in mind, that that's still there, okay? So I'll see a couple of questions here. Jesse said, return to work culture. I've got a gnat. Texas is gnat season. It's like trying to land on my nose. So you see me flailing around, that's what that is. Jesse says return to work culture may not be the same as as with new stresses from workplace change and requires perhaps a bit more emotional intelligence. Amen, Jesse. You're right on point. In fact, that's a big, big deal. It requires us to be more aware and have more EI or emotional intelligence. Because as you recall, like I mentioned before we had the pandemic and we kind of exited the office, there was a lot of tension around political issues, environmental issues, etc. That is still there. And with a whole lot of other social changes that have happened over the past year, you will probably agree with me that there's been a lot of very strong change. And much of it's extremely positive and it's exciting and it's change. So it's stressful for people. They don't know necessarily how to behave, how to show up, how to, are you the same person? Like they kind of have to get to know people again. I mean, they may have known you, worked with you prior to the, we went fully remote, but now coming back into either a hybrid or fully in-person experience, people have to, it's going to be a little awkward. So just keep that in mind and raise your consciousness, raise your level of awareness so you can show up as that person that's very confident and calm and able to be more open-minded, at least more diplomatic about certain situations. Good morning, Denise from Houston, Texas. And Eva says, I think the responsibilities have been uncovered for all of us adults, whether it be our parents, our kids, and ourselves. How do we put these priorities into our jobs? Absolutely. Great question, Eva. Thank you so much for asking that question. So it is a big deal. We have changed our priorities and our structures and what we think is most important and how we want to show up in our lives. And almost everybody I've talked to is like, no, family needs to be first. I need to have more flexibility. I need to be there for my spouse, my kids, my parent, what have you, right? I need to be there for my life. And that freedom of choice is very important to me. So, by the way, big company, don't expect me to sacrifice all that for a 3-hour commute. It's just not probably going to happen for me. And you will find, and I'll discuss a little bit more about this later, that when companies start to come out with what their idea of the new workplace format looks like, you may see a lot of attrition, because some people will not want to agree with whatever that workplace decides. There are some leaders who are just like, nope, we work better in person. Everybody's coming in. I don't care if you have to commute 4 hours each day. Too bad. You're coming into the office. And a lot of people are like, time out, buddy. Guys and gals, look, this is not me. This is not who I am right now. And I've been very profitable and successful, and performance is very high for me. I've made remote work or blended model work for me quite well. Thank you very much. So change is tough. Give yourself some awareness and space and grace, because as we go through a strong change cycle again, as you may recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, we all felt tired and stretched, kind of a little exhausted, mentally drained. And that is because our brains and bodies were trying to adjust to a new habit, a new routine, and that takes energy. Guess what? We will need to do that again. We'll need to adjust to a new habit and a new routine again. So with that being said, just be aware, give yourself that mental buffer, that self-awareness, that, hey, I'm okay. I know I'm going to be a little bit more tired. I might be a little cranky from time to time. And that's because I'm adjusting to new routines and new habits. So it is important for companies to be aware that this is something that's going on. Now, not every company has the same level of EI, as Jesse put it earlier. Not everybody's leaders are at that point. Okay, they don't always get it, but they need to know that some people prefer working from home for various reasons, and others are less willing to spend money on childcare again. If they've made it work, then they'll not necessarily want to spend, and it's a lot of money for childcare. And they need to understand how it will fit into a hybrid arrangement. Is that going to be a swing schedule? Is that schedule going to change every week? Well, that's really a pain for parents to try to deal with that if there's not some sort of consistency. So this is something you can definitely bring up as concerns if you're currently in a workplace, and if you're seeking, it's something that you can be aware of and have your little radar up as a question during the interview process. You might want to understand what expectations are and what will be the plan moving forward once we start going back into either a hybrid or a full-time in person, or for some fully remote continuing environment. Again, as I mentioned before, we're expecting people to adjust their routines again, and this will mean some backlash. I'm expecting exhaustion as your brain gets used to a different routine. You may feel more tired, anxious. Hey, raise your hand if you felt a little anxious about what's to come. I know I certainly have. Every now and then I'm like, oh gosh, I really want to see people. And that also means a 3-hour drive for me total. Fortunately, not just one way, but I really enjoy living in the country. It's good. It's peaceful. I'm happy here. The internet's a lot better, believe it or not. So I don't necessarily want to go back to a busy, cluttered, congested, and polluted city. It's not really something I want to do. And I also miss seeing people in person. So what is your priority? What does it look like for you? I also suggested to my husband that I think we will start to see more opportunities for people to spend money on Airbnb and be actually renting out temporary residences during when they have to be at work in person. But just know that stress can be higher than previously expected as people adjust. So let me know what your concerns are. What are your peak concerns when it comes to either finding a new job during this time frame, or what are your peak concerns when it comes to coming back into the office? Is that, getting to know new people, a new routine? Is that the fact that you may not necessarily have your own desk anymore because a lot of people are moving to hot desk situations, which sounds great, but in reality and in practice, because I know I've done quite a few of those particular transitions, some people are not so fond because people are territorial. So while there will be hybrid work environments and every combination you can possibly imagine, some of which may not make sense or seem very well planned out because they've never done it. They're kind of making it up as they go. There may be changes once the reentry model has been launched. So they may launch it and go, oh, you know what? That really doesn't work. Let's change it. It will happen. This may create frustration for employees. It also may create some tension for job seekers as they aren't sure what to expect. Take, for example, one of my clients who signed up as a director for a company. He really loves the company. He loves what's going on. He loves his team. He loves everything about it, except that suddenly now what was a remote position, they've decided, oh, you really have to move to the Northeast. He's like, that's not an option. I'm not uprooting my family. My wife has a great job here. I'm not moving to the new Northeast. So he's looking at potentially having to commute every week via plane because they now have flipped the switch. What they said was going to be a fully remote position. Oh, no, we really need you to show up in person. So he's in some negotiation about that. So for you, the job seeker, I'd highly recommend, if you're seeking, get some clarity about that. Okay, if it's right now remote or hybrid, will that change? And you may not get the answer you want. Just know that, because a lot of companies don't have them yet, right? Jesse says, an acceptance of some things that don't make sense. Yes, absolutely. Like being in mask and cubes and attending online meetings with others that are nearby because of capacity limits in conference rooms. Yes, also true. You may find yourself asking yourself or others that will sit still long enough to listen, why are we in person? Because we're still meeting remotely. We're still using video conferences. I'm sitting here in my cube or in my office or at my hot desk, and I'm still meeting remotely because either half the people are working remotely full time or they're on the other shift because we're doing swing shifts, hybrid models, and not everybody's in the office. It will not necessarily make sense at first. And we may find, again, this is uncharted territory. So we may find that going back to work in person doesn't really work anymore. So for those of you who love seeing people in person all the time and really can't wait to get back into the office, that may not be the news you want to hear. But we don't know yet. We don't have those answers. We can't look into the crystal ball and go, oh, yes, I see the future as being this. We don't necessarily have all those answers yet. So patience. There will be some instances like Jesse mentioned that just flat out don't make sense at all. For example, while my husband is desperately, for an introvert, seriously, he is really excited about going back into the office. On the other hand, he's also cognizant of the fact that he really enjoys being out in the country. So we're having some discussion because he has a lot more flexibility in his position. He can not quite call the shots because he still needs to work under the company expectations of normal for that time. But he can say, okay, look, I need to be at these types of meetings, and these happen on Thursdays. So why don't I be in the office every other Thursday, or Wednesday and Thursday, or whatever? So he can probably say that. Not everyone has that flexibility, and it's something that you, the job seeker, or you, the employee, probably wants to get some clarity around. Can you drive your own schedule? Is that even an option for you? Can you be that person if you really don't want to go back into the office because you hate the commute and you don't want to absorb that back into your life? Because here's the thing, how many of you have been working more hours? Share with me if that's you, if you've been working more hours since you've been working remotely, because it will matter when we go back into the office. If you were expected to commute, they won't necessarily say, oh, well, now I have a commute, so I can't work 12 hours a day, which, by the way, is not healthy. I can't work 12 hours a day because I also have a commute. They'll still expect that same level of performance. And how does that feel for you? So let me know how that feels in the chat, or if that's something you're concerned about. You probably want some reassurance and confidence from your leaders as far as answers, but they probably just don't have them. So feel free to speak up in a calm and diplomatic way if you see something that's just frankly not working and doesn't make sense, because like I mentioned before, they're making it up on the fly. Also, keep in mind that you'll have new team members, most likely, people you've never met before, and you may have met remotely, but not in person. So also keep in mind that means their in-person persona might not match their online persona. And you will still have people that are working remotely full-time anyway. And like I mentioned before, you may be asking yourself, why are we having a hybrid model or coming back into the office since we're still on Zoom? And I was hoping not to be on Zoom ever again, for those of you who have a Zoom brain drain. So Glenn says, start off that way, but about 6 months I adjusted my time. Good for you, Glenn. Because a lot of people are just like, I have either employment guilt because there's so many people that were unemployed at the time or still are. So I've got to work all these hours. So good for you, Glenn, for readjusting your schedule. But let me know how you feel about also adding a commute back into that. All right. Some of us who've taken that time back, and I've started cooking dinner. I know. It's not that I don't know how. I don't have time. So prior to the pandemic, I never cooked dinner, hardly ever, because my husband had this great big lunch at the office. He was never hungry. So why cook for somebody who's not hungry? Doesn't make sense. I want to cook for one person, so I hardly ever cook dinner. Now, I always cook dinner. So that's because I have the time, and my husband is now used to it. So we'll see how that goes. Eva said, working remote, the line needs to be drawn that work is over. Yes, absolutely, Eva. And for those of you who aren't quite sure about setting those boundaries, I highly recommend the strong use of your calendar and blocking your calendar. If you have somebody who's really fond of making a meeting with you at 6:30 p.m. or 7 o'clock at night. So block your time, because that calendar is yours, not theirs. And if you don't control it, someone else will. Cornisha says, I have been working more hours while working from home due to staff reductions. That's another thing to keep in mind, too. This very lean workplace environment will continue, because this is the alarming trend that I'm seeing. And I'm being honest. Okay, I'm just being honest with you here, that what I've seen, observed over the years, and it's been quite some time I've noticed this trend, is there is a continual leaning of resources. And by doing that, the companies continually ask and expect more of individual employees. They start asking to wear more hats, take on more responsibilities, And those responsibilities don't ever seem to come off. Okay, so this is a continual trend that has been made even worse with the pandemic. So my concern is if one does not communicate that one is, stretched to the limit, let's just put it that way, without sounding like we can't perform. Here's the thing, there are only so much time in the day. And there's somebody honking on the railroad behind us, so please pardon that. But there's so much time during the day. If employers continue to expect people to absorb more and more and more and come back in the office and absorb a commute, you will see attrition. That's just fact. So I'm looking to my crystal ball here, I'm expecting that there will be a significant jump in job seeking in the fall when companies start to roll out their plans for coming back into the workplace, whether it be a hybrid or full-time in person. We will expect to see a significant increase in job seeking because there will be a lot of people who just don't agree with this. Look, I put up with this staff reduction. I've taken on all these hats. Now the economy is doing better. Your trends are looking, your numbers are looking better as a company. You're not hiring more people, and you're expecting me to come back into the office. That's just not happening. It's not a part of my life plan. Bye. And so that's what will probably happen. David, he says, yes, he's in agreement. He's working more. Good to see you, David. Jesse says, a good article. He's sharing with you a good article here that working ourselves to death. We are. Hey, I did it too. As an entrepreneur, I did it as well. I'm totally guilty of doing that. And I did a lot of work over the past 6 months and more to focus on what is a priority for me, to make sure that I'm showing up 100% for my clients and not wasting, what I could call just wasting energy on things that are not value add. And it's scary. Jesse's sharing often does occur much later in life, sometimes decades later, than the long hours were worked. So what's interesting also, Jesse, is that there's been some research, and this has been a number of years ago now, that for those people who their work was really their definition of self, and you'll find that a lot of Americans have this. Our work defines who we are, right? So they were finding that after retirement, that 5 years after retirement, they saw a 75% increase in death. That's scary. Okay. So, and Jesse said the research has also found that working 55 hours or more a week is associated with 35% higher risk of stroke and a 70% higher risk of dying from heart disease compared with working 35 to 40 hours. That's not surprising to me. We are working ourselves to death, particularly in America. If you've ever been over to the European continent, particularly France, they have a different idea about this. David mentioned, he says, I have a 1.5-hour commute each way and can't imagine doing that again. Amen. It's been apparent that my health has improved. Yay. And I'm not waking up every day at 4:30 a.m. And for those of you who were just determined that if you don't wake up before dawn, you're a loser, well, I have news for you. Actually getting more sleep is a lot more to do with your success and your health long term than waking up and doing some silly thing at silly o'clock in the morning. David also says, I find that I work 8 to 1, taking a couple hours off early afternoon and then back to work late afternoon, early evening, because David's smart. He is working in his zone of genius. So that's another thing to consider that I didn't even have in my notes. Your zone of genius. Not everybody's working, your peak performance hours are the same. And if you've had the ability to flex your schedule according to where you show up the strongest and do your most production time, while still having some time for yourself when it makes sense for you, it may not align with your workplace future expectations. So how is that going to sync up? And let me know if any of you are like David, who has adjusted your schedule. Have you adjusted your schedule based on where you do the most performance, where you show up in your zone of genius, where you have the most energy, the most brain productivity during the day? For me, that's first thing in the morning. I'm the most productive first thing in the morning, and then I adjust my schedule accordingly. My mother is a night owl. She doesn't start getting cranky until about 9 p.m. Everybody's different, but how does that work when it comes to coming back into the office? Are you going to say, well, I will be there about 9 p.m.? I don't know. How would that work? And another thing to keep in mind, You know those people you've been avoiding in the workplace because you've been remote? That annoying coworker or their micromanaging boss or whomever it is that you've not had to necessarily deal with in person. Well, once you go back into the office, guess what? You'll have to deal with them again. And it will be different because also we can expect new cultural and behavioral expectations. A lot, as I mentioned before, has shifted in our culture, our social consciousness over the past year and beyond. In addition, we really haven't had time to practice our new social behavioral norms when it comes to how we intentionally and positively interact with DE&I in mind. If companies are smart, they will set up people for success and have some training around DE&I to aid reentry into social groups. That's very, very important. We haven't necessarily had a lot of interaction in person. So when it comes to doing that, it's important for us to understand what is the expectation. What is the normal? How do we behave? Particularly considering the very diverse and very powerful, emotionally charged stances we have in social, political, etc., that are out there right now. We're also finding that because people have been basically baking in their own juices for about a year, and thanks to algorithms getting only more of what you typically look at, they're having their viewpoints reinforced versus challenged. We're finding that people are a lot less open to new viewpoints and different ways of thinking. So we are in a strong change cycle, and just keep in mind to people who will have strong emotional responses to specific situations, prior events, give them space and grace. Try to rise above, and as Jesse mentioned before, leverage your EI, your emotional intelligence. Because most people have not been around larger groups of people for over a year, this is important to keep in mind. You may have people who may be a little awkward, and yourself included. You may not know, should I shake their hand? Should I not? Should I do the fist bump, the elbow bump? What are we doing? So it helps for companies to make a standard. Everybody does the elbow bump. That's fine. As long as there are expectations set, that will help people show up with less stress. Because if there's a lot of gray area and we're not sure about simple things like whether we shake hands, do a fist bump or an elbow bump or nothing, maybe we bow, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as there's expectation. But if there isn't that expectation there for very simple things, that will add to people's stresses already. And we also want to keep in mind to regulations outside of our control, perhaps. New processes and or removal of processes that have been working well, maybe something that was established for the remote work environment. You think, oh, that's really cool. Let's keep doing that. They take it away. Hot desk and lack of personal space is an issue. This brings up unforeseen stressors as well. Because if you think people aren't territorial, I have another thing coming for you. There may be a shortage of meeting spaces on peak attendance days. As Jesse mentioned earlier, we may be still doing Zoom meetings, even though we're all in the office, or maybe in the cubicle next door. And companies will find that there are still a number of people who are working remotely, which means video meetings all the time. Every single video meeting will have to be, or meeting will have to be a video meeting. And we'll need to understand how to incorporate those people who are tuning in from afar. We may have state mandated regulations, depending on where you're tuning in from, for group gatherings, mask, or proof of vaccination. These types of things. Very hot topic, by the way. You may be required to become vaccinated to return to work in person, or as a job seeker, you may want to understand what that looks like for certain companies and certain states. This is very emotionally charged topic, and it's something for you to consider whether you are currently employed or seeking new opportunities. Just want to keep that in mind. And some mindset and social challenges. You may see old tensions resurface. Remember what I said before? So what are some things that you are not looking, or let's put it this way, let's be positive. What are some things you're looking forward to when it comes to the future of work? So some things that are positive for you, that you know you're looking forward to, that are good. Maybe some things that are working very well now and that you're looking forward to having a better experience moving forward. So I'd love to hear from you about some things that you're looking forward to when it comes to the future of work. Because while we have been in little social or media bubbles and our mindsets have been a little ingrained, and we may be less likely to be open to diverse viewpoints, while we still need to be that way because we need to act very strongly with DE&I in mind, There may be new alliances have been formed. There may have been alliances we need to rekindle. People will not respond to quite the way they used to. And we need to also understand that not everybody's excited about being in person. If some people are concerned about being a remote, if they are remote work, well, be considered a second-class citizen. When the people in the office be jealous of those people who are remote and have their perceived freedoms. The good news is that everyone has had a taste of remote work now. So expect there to be more empathy towards people who are remote working. Let me know if you have any questions about this so far, because I'm getting ready to get into the part where you can thrive as a job seeker and thrive in the future of work. So I'd love to hear what you're looking forward to. What positives in the future of work are you looking forward to? Or if you still have a question about something or a concern. So what can you expect as a job seeker? First of all, it'd be a great idea to ask about the company policy around remote work versus in person. Do they have plans? If so, what are they? Can you request hybrid, remote, or an in-person work environment based on what you do? Like my husband, as I mentioned before, we're, as a family, talking about, okay, when do you need to be there? When can you be here? Because my husband has he's one of those personalities that every meeting is a priority. So we're having conversations about when does he really need to be there, because it is a 3-hour round trip commute. That's not fun. So like David, that's not a commute anybody wants to tackle. Can you, as a job seeker, negotiate being hybrid, remote, or in person as a part of your benefits, as a part of your onboarding package? What are the expectations also around physical contact, meeting in the office? Will there be regulations? What are they? As a job seeker, it's very important for you to understand that. What are the company's expectations of you, the employee, to comply with the impending changes? Like, for example, mandatory vaccines to work here. We'll see, that's something we need to keep in mind. You never know. Dress codes may change. I joked when we first started the show about, having to wear real pants. That's kind of serious, actually, because people haven't had to wear a button-up shirt necessarily in over a year. Why do we want to go back to that? Seems a little silly. We will see how workplaces and companies align with people's new mode of being. They realize people are just as productive in pajama pants. I'm not saying that will ever show up in the workplace, however. So how can you thrive in the future of work? The good news is making sure those who are in a hybrid versus remote work environment get equal opportunities is top of mind. So it is a topic that leaders are aware of, they're cognizant of, and they have been in a remote work environment, so they kind of get it now. So if you are a person who would prefer to remain in a remote work environment, however, is concerned about how you can thrive and elevate your career in the future of work, just know that this is top of mind. So leaders are less likely to just let that slide, because the facts are right now, we as human beings do create in-person relationships and the like no trust factor much more quickly and more solidly in person than we do remotely. However, it can still be done remotely. It just takes a little bit more intentionality on your part and a little bit more time. You always, regardless whether you're in-person, hybrid, or remote, you want to leverage your communication to share your goals, aspirations, and how you like to grow as a professional. If you don't share, then you're leaving it up to someone's assumptions about how you'd like to grow, and that's never a good idea. So you do want to share those, particularly with your support group, and if you feel like it's the right thing to do with your immediate supervisor or manager or leader. And share your real-time experience. As we're evolving in this remote work environment, share their real-time experience in a non-judgmental way when change is needed to the current state. If something is not working, share that with those who are decision makers in a non-judgmental and diplomatic fashion, because they're making it up as they go as well. They need to know if something's truly an issue so these things can be adjusted, because expect once they implement these changes and plans that they will change over time. So we're getting ready to wrap up the show. If you have any other questions, comments, I'm here, live Q&A. Please pop them in the chat. I definitely want to get to those, answer those before we wrap up the Career Coffee Chat live show today. But just know that regardless of whether you're remote, in the office, or both, you can thrive if you leverage your network. That network being your in-person or intercompany network, as well as your external network, but your intercompany network. Because while people build trust faster in person they do remotely, it still can be done and is being done all over the world. Just understand what meetings are a priority for you if you want to be remote, and show up to those that are most strategic for you, if possible. Now, David, if you're commuting 3 hours total, we want to be very strategic about which meetings you show up for in person. So just consider those, and are those a topic of conversation you can have with key stakeholders and decision makers within your organization? Can you create your own future? Because they're kind of making it up as they go, and we need to help them see what works and what doesn't, and what's broken needs to be fixed. So for those of you tuning in to Career Coffee Chat Live or listening to the replay later, I hope this is very helpful for you showing up in the remote workplace, or the future of work, whether that be remote, in person, or hybrid model. If you do have any questions later on, feel free to either pop them in the comments of this replay or send me a personal message. I'm happy to help you thrive and elevate your career, regardless of what type of model and return to work environment or reentry might look like for you. And I want to make sure that you are thriving and succeeding. And I would love to hear your concerns, because this is a very unprecedented time for all of us. We aren't quite sure. And I predicted 6 months ago that we would probably be returning to mostly remote work environments. But what we may find is that we have to go through these growing pains to understand about what will actually work for us in the future. All right. So it's a great pleasure speaking with all of you, seeing all your smiling faces on the various media channels. It's been a pleasure having you on Career Coffee Chat live show. And of course, if you're watching the replay later, feel free to pop your comments, questions, or anything in the chat. I will be notified and we'll get back to you. And don't forget, Career Coffee Chat podcast available on all the major channels. Great to see you, David. You're very welcome. And I will be working on this month or next month. We're still up in the air. I'm trying to get together a panel of HR professionals at the senior level to help people understand what they can expect when it comes to the future of work, particularly around reentry. So that will be coming as a special event. So stay tuned, and also stay tuned for some special things coming in this summer and to help you elevate your career. And for now, this is all. It was great seeing you. Until next time, friends, keep elevating.